We learned this week that the federal government is open to potentially changing the Emergencies Act. Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc says Ottawa will consider a number of recommendations from the Justice Rouleau report, which came out last year, talking around 22 changes. Now, to chat about this in more detail is Lethbridge MP and Shadow Minister for Canadian Heritage, Rachael Thomas, who joins us here from the Windy City. Rachel, welcome back to BCN.
Hey, Hal, thank you. Nice to be here.
Now, in your opinion, what are some of the recommendations from the Rouleau report that maybe need adopting when it comes to the Emergencies Act?
I think it's first important just to remind ourselves here just for a moment as to what happened here. So the Emergencies Act, of course, was incited by the Prime Minister, and it was his response to what was known as the trucker convoy in Ottawa. And of course, we had truckers from all across the country fill the streets there in the nation's capital. And the reason they did so is because they were against vaccine mandates was one of the big things that they were against. But more importantly, they were against the Prime Minister's divisive politics. He was certainly trying to, stigmatize and divide us as Canadians. And so they were protesting that, and they had every right to do so. The Prime Minister, in a rage of glory, decided that he was going to enact the Emergencies Act. What has been determined now from the federal courts is actually that he moved that act unnecessarily. Now, of course, Trudeau can't accept that ruling, and so he's taking it to be challenged. But nevertheless, that ruling has been made. And so it doesn't surprise me that Minister Dominic LeBlanc then is saying they need more time. They're going to need more time probably for a long time to actually make any changes or implement any of the 56 recommendations. To answer your question directly, Hal, look, the number one recommendation out of that report that should be enacted today, it should not take any further consideration, is he said, point blank, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms needs to be upheld. That's a no-brainer. Yeah, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms needed to be upheld from day one and never should have been violated. And so I would start there, and then I would continue implementing a number of his other recommendations.
Rachel, another class action lawsuit has been launched against both the federal and provincial governments on behalf of Albertans who were vaccine injured or who lost their jobs during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, what are your thoughts when you hear about some civil lawsuits such as this?
Yeah, I think first my heart breaks for those that did suffer a vaccine injury. I've certainly sat in my office with a few of these folks who have suffered because of the vaccine that they took, and it's been proven through medical assessments and documentation. And then, they've applied for assistance from a federal program that was set up in order to respond. And it's been hurdle after hurdle, unfortunately. There's been so many gatekeepers in the way of receiving the payout that is due to them, the medications that they should be given, the therapies that they should have access to. And so I'm trying to help these folks be able to access those things that they rightly deserve. So it doesn't surprise me that this case has come forward. I think people have suffered a tremendous amount, and they have every right to bring a civil case like this to the courts, and I look forward to watching the process unfold.
Now, we received more insight into the Winnipeg lab story, Rachel, but once again, it appears as though the Trudeau government, assisted by the NDP, appears to be stopping us from finding out more. Now, some of the recent information released is that one of the two fired scientists, Dr. Key, was doing some work to benefit China. Now, that included working with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, transferring various viruses, including Ebola. Your thoughts?
Oh, yeah. So we have evidence that there were significant security breaches starting in 2018 from these two scientists who were working on behalf of, the PRC. And not only transferring, important information, top secret information, but also, incredibly dangerous pathogens. And so, of course, this is a massive security breach and raises significant questions pertaining to our country's ability to maintain security and sovereignty. And obviously, this is a huge failure by the Liberal government. And so it's no wonder why Mr. Trudeau stood in our way every single time we took initiative to ask for documents and seek further information on this. I mean, Trudeau went to great lengths, including taking the Speaker of the House of Commons to court to try to prevent the release of these documents. We now have over 600 pages of incredibly condemning documentation with regard to what has happened in this lab and the illegal transfer of information. And it's incredibly startling. And I think Canadians certainly deserve all of the answers. So we will continue as Conservatives to push for that and try our best to get to the bottom of what happened here. And I think most importantly, going forward under a Conservative government, we would make sure that there is greater security brought to this lab and to our country as a whole, and make sure that this doesn't happen in the future.
It appears as though Canadians are really taking notice of some of these serious issues, Rachel. The latest polls show that the Trudeau Liberals are around 17 points behind your party, the Pierre Poilievre Conservatives. But how can you really maintain that momentum? An election is not expected until the fall of 2025.
Yeah, it's a good question, Hal. I think I think in some ways it's simple in the sense that this is truly who we are. This is us as Conservatives living our values, the things that matter most to us, because we believe that they matter most to Canadians. And so when we say we're going to axe the carbon tax, we're going to build the homes, we're going to fix the budget, we're going to stop the crime, we mean it. We mean it. There is no other message that is more important than that. Because these are the four things that we're hearing from Canadians as their priorities, and therefore they are our priorities. And so to continue going forward on that message and to continue building momentum on behalf of Canadians and standing up for their needs, I don't believe is a problem for us at all, because that is what it is to lead. That is what it is to form government. It's to be on the side of the working people.
Now let's talk about that carbon tax for just a moment here, Rachel. It's going up April 1st by around 23%. That'll make life so much harder for so many of us who use natural gas to heat our homes and filling up our vehicles. Now, we do receive rebates, but oftentimes the rebates are simply not enough. Now, your leader, Pierre Poilievre, keeps blasting the Prime Minister, saying, like you said, he needs to axe the tax, but why isn't the message getting through? Cannot Trudeau see how so many Canadians are struggling right now?
Unfortunately, Hal, I think the message is getting through in the sense that the Prime Minister knows Canadians don't like the carbon tax. It's why he paid costly consultants to help him do a rebrand. He knows Canadians hate it. And so he tried to come up with some new spiffy name in hopes that he could perhaps, get Canadians on side. The fact of the matter is they're not. Canadians are paying through the roof when it comes to the carbon tax, whether it's on gas or groceries or home heating, and they're sick of it. Quite frankly, they can't afford it. Month over month, we saw 2 million people on average visit food banks across this country during 2023. In 2024, we're expecting upwards of 3 million people as a monthly average to go to food banks. I mean, this is not the Canada we know. This is supposed to be a place of opportunity and being able to further oneself. And instead, due to Trudeau's punitive policies, people are, 2 steps back rather than 2 steps ahead. That's not okay.
Now, MPs, as you know, are in line for another pay raise on April the 1st. But Rachel, is this really necessary, especially with so many Canadians hurting right now? Have you and your party maybe questioned the PM on this? The timing is a little off, don't you think?
That's a fair question, Hal. I think what you're referring to is on April 1st, there's an automatic legislated raise of 2% for all elected officials within the House of Commons. This is something that Prime Minister Stephen Harper froze in 2008. He enacted legislation that would not allow us to receive those raises. It was Trudeau's first step when he became Prime Minister to reenact that in 2015. So at the end of the day, it is legislated. I've indicated that I would rather not receive it. Unfortunately, I've been told by the HR department that I'm not allowed to refuse. It's something that is legislated and therefore automatic. All that to say, I think you're right, Hal. Canadians are suffering. They're certainly finding it very difficult to make ends meet. And I do believe that as leaders of this country, it is up to us to go first and to make sure that we're in step with them. And so I would be in favor of seeing that frozen.
You know what, here's a thought. How about take the extra money that the MPs are going to make from that legislative increase and put it towards food banks across the country and support our food banks? Rachel, as you know, there's an election this fall coming up in the United States. Donald Trump is the last remaining strong Republican candidate, with Nikki Haley suspending her campaign. Now, Trump has been called a protectionist, America first in the past, but you know what? U.S. President Joe Biden hasn't been much better. How would your party handle things differently should you form government in 2025 when it comes to dealing with protectionist presidents affecting trade between Canada and the United States and our jobs?
Great question. I think the first thing that comes to mind actually is, given that Prime Minister Brian Mulroney just passed away not too long ago, he comes to mind. In 1989, he is the one who achieved a free trade agreement with the United States of America. And the way that he went about that was through relationship building and knowing that there was a benefit for both countries. And of course, we know that that free trade agreement has served Canada incredibly well. It would be our hope as Conservatives to continue to protect that relationship, to continue to advance that relationship. And to that end, we already have members of Parliament who are going to Washington on a regular basis in order to build that bridge and make sure that when we form government, we're ready to hit the road running.
Now, the Trudeau government is giving the CBC $1.4 billion an increase in funding, despite executives insisting that they received a request to cut the public broadcaster's budget. Now, this is one of the reasons why they announced they were laying off around 10% of their workforce. So with the extra funding, do you think that means more jobs will be saved and executives will be receiving their bonuses thanks to the Canadian taxpayer?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know that it's going to result in more jobs being saved, but it is perhaps going to result in more big bonuses being given to the top executives. I think Catherine Tait has made it really clear that her intent is to cut 800 jobs. She made that announcement just before Christmas, even before she knew what the final budget line would be. And then when she came to committee in at the end of January, we asked her if she herself felt she deserved a bonus. And her answer was, quote, "Absolutely yes," end quote. And so here's someone who, has led the CBC during one of its most disastrous points in history, and yet believes that she deserves this supposed performance bonus. She goes on to contend for, her executive team and believes that they deserve the same. So this is not someone who is interested in saving jobs. This is someone who is interested in saving her job and saving bonuses for those that are at the top.
Now, Rachel, you've mentioned on social media in the past that your party wants to get to the bottom of the, quote, Arrive scam scandal, an app that was supposed to cost $80,000 for Canadian taxpayers ballooned up to over $60 million. How is that going right now?
Yeah, again, I appreciate the question. Look, during COVID, the government decided to create an app known as Arrive Can. We now call it the Arrive Scam. The reason being is because the Prime Minister promised Canadians that it would only cost $80,000. However, a recent Auditor General report shows that it cost at least $60 million. Now, the reason we don't know the exact cost is because actually the Auditor General wasn't able to find paperwork for a whole lot of these contracts. And so what we know is that it was at least 60 million, but it could have been even more. And what we also know based on the Auditor General's report is really it was a ton of money being given out to friends by the Liberals. One of the businesses was GC Strategies. They received $20 million. This is a company composed of two people working out of a basement. They even admit that they didn't do any of the work themselves. Instead, they subcontracted it out. What the Auditor General's report, showed further was that 76% of those that received contracts didn't actually do any work on the app. So it means that there was this payout for them, but they didn't actually contribute to its creation. So we have to ask the question, what happened here? I mean, this is a massive boondoggle, and this is a whole lot of Canadian taxpayer money that is being handed out to Liberal insiders. It's wrong, and there does need to be great accountability. And so as Conservatives, we're insisting on that. And so we continue to apply pressure both at committee and in the House of Commons on a daily basis.
Now I want to talk to Rachael Thomas, the Shadow Minister for Canadian Heritage. Now, you also posted on social media how the Liberals need to be held to account by not spending so many tax dollars on those flashy business class seats as they travel to explore Canadian culture. Can you explain in more detail?
Sure. At Heritage Committee, there was discussion around whether or not we should travel for committee. And the Liberal members were quite keen that we should travel. And the chair of the committee, Hetty Fry from Vancouver, offered that the reason we should spend this money on traveling across Canada was to hear from those that she referred to as, quote, Joe Schmo. She went on to explain that this travel was necessary so that we listen to regular Canadians, because in Ottawa, in her mind, we didn't take that opportunity. What I find interesting about this is, look, as elected officials, we have every opportunity to listen to regular Canadians. That's what we should be doing every single day that we are in our ridings. That is our job. That is what we are elected for. And so we don't need to spend tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars on business class tickets to travel across the country to do that. We just need to put our boots on the ground in our ridings and actually do the work we were elected to do. Certainly as the local member of Parliament for Lethbridge, that's what I'm committed to. So I'll continue to be here and be present and listen to those that are, in this community. And my hope would be that my Liberal colleagues would hopefully do the same.
Lethbridge Conservative MP and Shadow Minister for Canadian Heritage, Rachael Thomas, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Hal. Nice to be with you.